Hi, welcome back to an episode of the book club in the world. Book club, yeah. And today is an extremely exciting episode. Today is episode number 364. And today guys will continue our journey. 64 wasn't just not about. Today we will continue our journey with the influence types according to Persuasion by the Cialdini. Page 170 to 172 from the PDF, 160 and 162 on the regular book. So let's go. אבל then, what's more parent? It's the milligram experiment. What's more parent for the behavior patterns? The experiment actually produced. How can we explain those alarming patterns? Perhaps, as some have argued, it has to do with the fact that the subjects were all males who are known as a group for their aggressive tendencies. Or that the subjects didn't recognize the potential alarm that such high shock voltage could cause. Or that the subjects were a freakish collection of moral cretins who enjoy the chance to inflict misery. But there is good evidence against each of those possibilities. First, the subject sex was shown by a later experiment to be relevant to their willingness to give all the shocks to the victim. Female teachers were just as likely to do so as the males in milligrams initial study. The explanation is that subjects weren't aware of the potential physical danger to the victim, was also examined in a subsequent experiment and found to be wanting. In that version, when the victim was instructed to announce that he had the heart condition and to declare that his heart was being affected by the shock. That is all. Get me out of here. I told you I had heart trouble. My heart is starting to bother me. I refuse to go on. Let me out. The results are the same as before. 65% of the subjects carried out their duties faithfully for the maximum shock. Finally, the explanation, it means the subjects were twisted, sadistic bunch not at all representative of the average citizen, is proven unsatisfactory as well. The people who answered the newspaper ad to participate in his memory experiment represented the standard cross-section of ages, occupations, and educational levels within our society. What is more, later on, a battery of personality scales showed those people to be quite normal psychologically, with not a hint of psychosis as a group. They are, in fact, just like you and me, or as Milgram likes to term it, they are you and me. If he is right that his studies implicate us in the aggressive findings, if he is right that his studies implicate us in their aggressive findings, the unanswered question becomes an uncomfortably personal one. What could make us do such things? Milgram is sure he knows the answer. It had to be it has to do, he says, with a deep-seated sense of duty to authority within a soul. According to Milgram, the real culprit in the experiments was the subject's inability to defy the wishes of the boss of the study. The lab quoted a researcher who argued and, if need be, directed the subject to perform the duties, despite the emotional and physical mayhem they were causing. The evidence supporting Wingram's obedience to authority explanation is strong. First, it is clear that without the researchers' directives to continue, the subjects would have ended the experiment quickly. They hated what they were doing and agonized over the victims' agony. They implored the researcher to let them stop. When refused, they went on, but in the process they trembled, they perspired, the shock, the stammered protests and additional pleas for the victims' release. Their fingernails dug into their own flesh. They beat their lips until they bled. They held their heads in their hands. Some fell into fits of uncontrollable nervous laughter. As far outside observer to the experiment brought. I observed a mature and the initially poised businessman enter the laboratory, smiling and confident. Within 20 minutes, he was reduced to a twitching, stuttering wreck who was rapidly approaching a point of nervous collapse. He constantly pulled on his earlobe and twisted his hands. At one point, he pushed his fist into his forehead and muttered, "Oh God, let's stop it." And yet, he continued to respond to every word of the experimenter and obeyed the end. In addition to those observations, Milgram has provided even more convincing evidence for the obedience to authority interpretation of his subject's behavior. In a later study, for instance, he had the researcher and the victim switch scripts so that the researcher told the teacher to stop delivering shocks to the victim, while the victim insisted bravely that the teacher continue. The results couldn't have been clearer. 100% of the subjects refused to give one additional shock when it was merely the fellow subject who demanded it. The identical finding appeared in another version of the experiment in which the researcher and fellow subject switched roles so that it was the researcher who was strapped into the chair and the fellow subject who ordered the teacher to continue. What was the protest of the researcher? Again, not one subject touched another shock level. The extreme degree to which subjects in Milgram's situation were attentive to the wishes of authority was documented in yet another variation of the basic study. In this case, Milgram presented the teacher with two researchers. We should contradictory orders. One ordered the teacher to terminate the shocks when the victim cried out for release, while the other maintained that the experiment should go on. Those conflicting instructions reliably produced what may have been the project's only humor. In tragicomic befuddlement and defies darting from one researcher to another. Subjects would beseech the pair to agree on a single command they could follow. Wait, which it is going to be? One says stop and one says go. Which is it? When the researchers remained at loggerheads, the subject tried frantically to determine who was the bigger boss. Failing this route to obedience with the authority, the young subject finally followed his better instincts and ended the shocks. As in the other experimental variations, such a result will hardly be expected at the subject's motivations involved some form of sadism or neurotic aggressiveness. To Milgram mind, evidence of a chilling phenomenon emerges repeatedly from his accumulated data. It is the extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths of the command of an authority that constitutes the chief finding of the study. There are sobering implications of this finding for those concerned with the ability of another form of authority, government, to extract frightening levels of obedience from ordinary citizens. Furthermore, the findings tells us something about the sheer strength of authority pressures in controlling our behavior. After witnessing Milgram subjects squirming and sweating and suffering at their task, would anyone doubt the power of the force that held them there? For those whose doubts remain, the story of Wilson might prove instructive. On September 1, 1987, to protest US shipments of military equipment to Nicaragua, Mr. Wilson and two other men stretched their bodies across the railroad tracks leading out of the Concord, California Naval Weapons Station. The protesters were confident that the racket would delete the scheduled train progress that day, as they had notified the Navy and the railroad officials of their intent with an intent 3 days before. But the civilian crew, which had been given orders not to stop, never even slowed the train, despite being able to see the protesters 600 feet ahead. Although two of the men managed to scramble out of harm's way, Mr. Wilson was not quick enough to avoid being struck and having both legs severed below the knee. Because the Navy medical corpsmen at the scene refused to treat him or allow him to be taken to the hospital in his ambulance. Onlookers, including Mr. Wilson's wife and son, were left to try to stand the flow of blood for 45 minutes until a private ambulance arrived. Amazingly, Mr. Wilson, who served 4 years in Vietnam, does not blame either the crewmen or the corpsmen for his misfortune. He points his finger instead at a system that constrained the directions for the pressure to obey. They were just doing what I did in hell. They were following orders that are part of an insane policy. They are the fall guys. Although the crew members showed Mr. Wilson assessments of them as victims, they did not share his magnanimity. In what is perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the incident, the train crew filed suit against him, requesting punitive damages for the humiliation, mental agony, and physical stress they suffered because he hadn't allowed them to carry out their orders without cutting off his legs. Whenever we are faced with so potent motivation, American. No, guess what? This is the end of the episode. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to put the picture that you choose to invest without me. And I can make a steal and tomorrow's episode of the Guess Book in the World. They can be glad. This is the Bagata. They can also find. Bye.